Welcome to Prospect Global. Something unusual is happening along the US-Mexico border. For years, the story has been about a relentless river of people moving north, a flow driven by desperation, the hope for a better life. But now, that river is starting to change its course. Thousands of migrants, many of them from Venezuela, are making a heart-wrenching decision. Instead of pushing forward into the United States, they are turning around. They are heading back south, a phenomenon experts are calling reverse flow. This isn't a retreat they ever wanted to make. It's a journey born from a new and harsh reality that has slammed the door shut on their American dream, leaving them stranded and with no other choice. This reverse migration is a direct response to a sudden and significant shift in U.S. immigration policy. Imagine traveling for months, enduring unimaginable dangers, only to arrive at your destination and find the rules have changed overnight. That is precisely what happened. A new policy, implemented without much warning, effectively blocked a key legal pathway for Venezuelans and others who arrived at the border. The hope of applying for asylum, the very thing that fueled their journey, vanished. Suddenly, the risk of immediate deportation became very real. To understand why thousands are turning back, we need to look at what changed. For a time, there was a specific process in place for Venezuelans. Under a humanitarian parole program, those who had a financial sponsor in the U.S. and applied online from outside the country could enter legally. However, for those who made the dangerous overland journey and arrived at the border, the situation was different but still held a sliver of hope. They could often present themselves to border officials and begin the long, complicated process of seeking asylum. This pathway, while difficult, was a beacon for many fleeing economic collapse and political persecution in Venezuela. Then, the rules were rewritten. The Biden administration expanded a Trump-era public health order known as Title 42. This order allowed authorities to rapidly expel migrants without letting them apply for asylum. But the crucial change was a new agreement with Mexico. For the first time, Mexico agreed to accept expelled Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Cubans. This closed the loophole. Before, even if expelled, many Venezuelans couldn't be sent back to their home country due to strained diplomatic relations. Now they could be sent directly back to Mexico, where they faced uncertainty and danger. The impact was immediate and devastating. The new policy was announced abruptly, catching thousands of migrants mid-journey, people who had already crossed the treacherous Darien Gap jungle. The story of Venezuelan migration is a story of escalating crisis. It didn't begin yesterday. Let's look at a simple timeline. From 2017 to 2019, the first major wave began. These were often middle-class Venezuelans with some resources. They fled a collapsing economy and political instability, mostly settling in nearby countries like Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. They traveled by bus or by plane. While their situation was difficult, it was a more orderly migration. The primary destination was South America, where cultural and language similarities made integration seem possible. The United States was a distant dream for most. The period from 2020 to 2021 marked a significant shift. The COVID-19 pandemic hit South America hard, devastating economies, jobs disappeared, xenophobia was on the rise. At the same time, the journey to the US, while still dangerous, started to seem like the only viable option. We began to see a new kind of migrant, people with fewer resources, forced to travel on foot. This is when the Darien Gap, a lawless jungle separating Colombia and Panama, became a major migration route. The destination had changed from neighboring countries to the distant promise of the United States. By 2022, the flow north had become a torrent. The journey north through Central America and Mexico is honestly notoriously dangerous. Migrants face robbery, extortion, and violence from criminal gangs and sometimes corrupt officials. Now, just imagine making that journey in reverse. The migrants heading south are even more vulnerable. They have exhausted their savings. They are physically drained and emotionally drained. They carry the heavy burden of failure, making them easier targets for predators who prey on the desperate. The return trip is not a simple walk home. It is another fight for survival through a landscape that remains just as hostile as it was on the way up. These returning migrants are often traveling with absolutely nothing. Many sold their possessions to fund the initial trip, expecting to start fresh in the United States. Now, they are penniless, relying on the kindness of strangers and overwhelmed charities for a meal or a place to sleep. They beg for bus fare to get to the next town, often traveling in small, fragmented groups. This isolation increases their risk. International organizations are sounding the alarm. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has expressed deep concern over the new United States policy and its consequences. Officials have repeatedly stated that any policy that prevents people from seeking asylum and returns them to potentially dangerous situations. They emphasize that every person has the right to have their protection claim heard, regardless of how they enter a country. The United Nations sees this reverse flow not as a solution, but as the result of a policy that shifts the burden onto other countries and puts vulnerable people at even greater risk. The Ombudsman for Human Rights in a Mexican border state described the situation as a humanitarian crisis in the making. He says his office is overwhelmed with reports of abuse and exploitation targeting the stranded migrants. These people are in a state of total vulnerability, he said. They have no money, no legal status, no protection. The new United States policy did not solve a problem, it simply moved it and made it worse. We are now dealing with the fallout, and we do not have the resources to guarantee the safety and dignity of these thousands of people who are trapped here. Migration experts point out that policies focused solely on enforcement often have unintended consequences. A leading analyst at a migration policy institute explained that when one migration route is closed, it doesn't stop the movement. Instead, it redirects it, often through more dangerous channels. He warned that this reverse flow could be temporary. Desperate people, he argued, will eventually look for new, riskier ways to get to the United States or become easy recruits for criminal organizations. The sudden reversal of migration flows is sending shockwaves across the region. Countries in South and Central America, particularly Colombia. For years, Colombia has been the primary recipient of Venezuelan migrants. It has made enormous efforts to integrate millions of them. Now it must prepare for the return of thousands who are disillusioned and destitute. This places an additional strain on social services, healthcare, the job market, potentially reigniting social tensions that had begun to stabilize. Colombia is being asked to absorb the initial exodus, and now the returning wave of despair. Panama, Costa Rica, the small countries forming the land bridge of Central America, face a logistical nightmare. They struggled to manage the northward passage of migrants, now they must contend with people moving in the opposite direction. Governments lack infrastructure and funding to handle two-way traffic. Pressure on border communities is immense. There is a growing fear new permanent encampments will form, creating long-term social and security problems. Venezuela watches from a distance. The return of its citizens indicts the ongoing political and economic turmoil. The government may welcome them back publicly but lacks capacity to support them. There are no jobs, the healthcare system is in shambles, the political situation remains tense. A large-scale return could further destabilize the country. For migrants, returning home means facing the hardships they fled, a bitter end to a journey of hope. Looking ahead, the future is deeply uncertain. This reverse flow highlights the fragility of the regional approach to migration. What happens next depends on several factors. Will the United States modify its policy? Will regional governments cooperate for a more humane, orderly system? Or will migrants forge new, even more dangerous routes north? The one certainty is the underlying drivers, desperation, instability, the search for a dignified life, have not gone away. This reverse tide is not an end, but another painful chapter in an ongoing human drama. Subscribe to Prospect Global for U.S. immigration tips.